Stokely Carmichael once said that it is the job of the conscious to make the unconscious conscious. However, sometimes it's easier to fool people than it is to show them that they've been fooled. Nonetheless, those who know must teach. African proverb. The reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of a brutal history of discrimination and oppression are not caused by a silly slave syndrome myth. It's actually because of the white society's monopoly over information that are fed into our minds. Their control over information that we receive allows them to control what we believe. They've exploited this scenario by embedding false beliefs into our collective minds that benefits their white society. It's actually that simple. But they've manipulated us and dumbed down our minds to blame our collective mindset onto a silly slave syndrome myth, a Willie Lynch myth. Because this prevents us from unifying against the white society to confront their manipulation of our collective minds. Willie Lynch never existed. The alleged letter was actually written in 1970 by Dr. Kwabena Ashanti. He confirmed it's a complete work of fiction. He described those symptoms based upon behaviors he personally witnessed amongst our people. That's why the letter appears so accurate. This is also why when experts examined the letter, they found it contained modern words inconsistent with its 1700 date. Moreover, the Willie Lynch myth presents what would be the least effective method way used for controlling generations of people. True brainwashing systems require a system that's being constantly reapplied and reinforced upon the minds of the targeted population. If not, its effectiveness will lessen with each new generation and not worsen as we witness amongst our own people. Dr. Kwabena Ashanti's intention was a positive one. He wrote it to make us cognizant of our collective mindset and hope that it would produce positive change within our communities. But white oppressive forces took it and spread it into the black community as a weapon against us. Here's how it was used as a weapon against us. Within the U.S. government doctrine on psychological warfare, it states that the most effective way to subdue and control a large targeted population without actually physically fighting them is by misleading them to believe that their core problem is an internalized one. When people are made to believe that their core problem lies within themselves, this shifts their collective aggressions away from their enemies and redirect it towards themselves. It also makes them resentful towards themselves and make them more compliant with their oppressor's dominance over their lives. Many will, in fact, even prefer it. This is exactly what accepting the Willie Lynch myth does to black people. The white society needs to keep black people believing that our core problem lies within ourselves as a means of preventing us from unifying against them. Any ideology that claims that there's something inherently wrong with black people benefits the system of white supremacy. It's a psychological warfare tactic that is taught within the U.S. military war colleges. First, they fooled us with the Willie Lynch myth. Now we're fooling ourselves. The truth of our plighted condition is that white oppressive forces constantly and systematically deploys a black racially demoralizing psychological warfare propaganda campaigns against us. Because the damage that self-loathing creates divides the people and makes it much easier to control. Oppressors have used this tactic to imprison the minds of the oppressed for a very long time. And they fear the day when the oppressed fully understand how this works. This current system was developed in response to the unprecedented black protests of the 1960s. During the 1960s, African Americans' unified protest against the U.S. system of institutionalized racism was unprecedented. White social scientists were hired to study the black community, find the cause of the problem, and develop solutions. They determined that the unprecedented unified black protest was due to a unifying, elevated black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. Therefore, accordingly, white media propaganda designers were hired to keep African Americans believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves. It's a demoralize and rule tactic. It is the duty and obligation of the white government to maintain peace within their nation and to protect the interests of the white status quo. This includes implementing tactics that prevent dissent from rising amongst the black population. The number one tactic used is to deploy divide and rule tactics against the black population. Demoralizing divide and rule. People are easily controlled by the narrative that they routinely receive about themselves. When people constantly receive positive, affirming narratives about themselves, this lifts their collective self-esteem and unifies them. However, when people are constantly inundated with negative narratives about themselves, the opposite happens. They become demoralized, divided, and self-loathing. They also become more compliant with the dominance of other groups over their lives. This latter example is precisely what white oppressive forces are presently doing to black people. It's no strange occurrence that many black people are now self-loathing, perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and perceives Caucasians favorably in spite of a brutal history to the contrary. These thoughts and perceptions among black people that clearly benefits the white society were shrewdly indoctrinated into the minds of many black people without most of us even realizing it. White people owns the media and creates all societal narratives. Therefore, black people interpret their communities according to information and images presented by the white society. This literally means that white people controls black people's interpretation of ourselves. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of black people that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives and image about ourselves is a black racially demoralizing, divide and conquer psychological warfare campaign. Demoralizing, divide and conquer is a method of maintaining control over a targeted population through unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-loathing and division amongst them. This condition makes the targeted population much easier to control. This system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of black people without being challenged or counterbalanced by an equal amount of black positive racially affirming information. Its weapon is the message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects black people in terms of our behavior. It conveys a subliminal message that black people are our own worst enemies and we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. With time, being able to refute the constant negative information about ourselves, many black people eventually comes to accept them. They unconsciously influence how many black people feel about ourselves, creating resentment and self-hatred among us. It also turns our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirected towards ourselves. The human mind is like a computer. Regardless of how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information being fed into it. If it's possible to control the input into the human mind, then no matter how intelligent people are, it is entirely possible to control what they'll believe. Because white people controls the societal narratives that are routinely fed into the minds of black people, this allows them to shape the minds of black people in ways that serve the white society. This is the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres Caucasians in spite of a brutal history to the contrary. This brainwashing system is so effective that many black people now insist that their negative assessment about our entire race is absolutely true. However, in reality, those black people that presently make negative generalizations about our entire race cannot actually validate their statements based upon their own personal experiences. Those that insist that they can are not critically thinking, and they are delusional, because it's not humanly possible to accurately assess the collective state of millions of people based upon anyone's individual experiences. These negative perceptions about our racial group were actually indoctrinated into our minds by white media, social engineering scientists, and propaganda designers. When people are constantly inundated with negative lies about themselves, those lies become their reality. They begin to see only those things that appear to confirm the lies. White oppressive forces have thoroughly studied this mental phenomenon and weaponized it against black people. This psychological warfare program works so well that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact makes millions of us prefer it. It is at the root of both the feelings of self-hatred that afflicts many black people, as well as the false feeling of superiority that many whites possess. Our minds are shaped by narratives that are fed into a society, and the narratives are controlled by white people. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. Franz Fanon said that. Don't dispute facts that have been kept from you for a silly slave syndrome myth. Doing so will keep you mentally enslaved by the white society. Those who tell you the truth are trying to free your mind from a mental prison that you don't even know you're trapped within. One love and peace, brothers and sisters. One love and peace. It's time to wake up to our reality.